acting within the law.
I call the Honourable...
Mr. Speaker, there are two problems with the Kitteridge report. The first is that the Kitteridge report doesn't examine the critical issue, which was the role of John Key exercising his ministerial responsibility to have oversight over the Government Communications and Security Bureau. It can't do that. It was unfair to expect Rebecca Kitteridge to do that. She's Secretary of Cabinet. She is having day-to-day meetings with the Prime Minister. Is that why the Prime Minister chose a person that couldn't go to the heart of this problem and say, why was the Minister responsible for the Government Communications Security Bureau unable to do his job of exercising adequate and proper oversight over this agency? You know, we give our spy agencies incredible power. We need them. People have talked about cyber attacks. That's quite right. But they have incredible power, and they exercise that power with total secrecy. We, therefore, rely on the Minister responsible for the GCSB to make sure that safeguards, checks and balances are in place to ensure that that agency behaves legitimately under the law and behaves in a proper way. And I have to say this, that John Key failed absolutely in that responsibility. I remember John Key as Prime Minister in 2009, Antolly, coming into this House and saying that he would expect higher standards of his ministers. Those higher standards surely need to involve competence. They need to involve a readiness to exercise proper oversight. They need to involve a readiness to be open and transparent. And on every one of those criteria, John Key failed. By his own standards, he should have sacked himself as Minister in charge of the GCSB. He failed on every one of those fronts. But there's a second thing that the Kitteridge report fails to do, Mr. Speaker. The Kitteridge report fails to go to the heart of where this affair began, which was the raid on Kim.com's house. Now, the first thing that we know about that is that we went in and with a combination of the Keystone Cops and Rambo, I don't know which is more appropriate as a description, with helicopters and the Special Tactics Group, full use of force, and for what, Mr. Burrows? And for what? To issue an extradition warrant for copyright infringement. Can anybody in the world believe that the New Zealand Minister of Police allowed her police to go in fully armed with helicopters as if it was an attack on Hanoi during the Vietnam War, all to serve an extradition warrant and to seize a couple of computers? It was bizarre. You know, probably the police and the GCSB wanted to impress their colleagues in the United States, the FBI. Well, far from impressing them, sadly, Mr. Speaker, they showed their utter incompetence in how they carried out that role. And I hold the government ministers responsible for their failure of oversight. Secondly, they went in this dramatic way without the legal authority to do so. A High Court judge in this country, Justice Helen Winkleman, found that they had no right of search or seizure and they had an invalid warrant. So when Chris Finlayson, as the Attorney General, gets up in this House to spout, I want to know why there was so much incompetence and how you could conduct a raid that will make New Zealand liable to tens of millions of dollars in legal suits from Kim.com, how there was so much incompetence and why there is not an inquiry into that facet. And then there's the third aspect of that raid, Mr. Speaker, and that is that Kim.com and a number of other people were subjected to a month of covert surveillance without the legal right to conduct that surveillance. That's correct, Mr. Brownlee, isn't it? No legal right to conduct that surveillance. They did it on the basis, Mr. Brownlee, that they said that they didn't know that he was a New Zealand resident. But corporation had told them that very shortly afterwards, and your government concealed it from the public. Told them that they had acted illegally, but your government concealed it from the public. But John Key concealed something much worse than that. For the first time, a minister in charge of the Security Intelligence Service was told that there had been spying for a significant period of time in a comprehensive way, and the legal authority to do that was in doubt. John Key was told that in July. How do I know he was told that in July? Because he said so yesterday in his press statement. He was told that in July. And then, Mr. Speaker, for 9 long months he sat on that. He didn't just sit on it, but when he was asked in September whether this was an isolated incident, he said yes. Yes, it was an isolated incident. Mr. Speaker, John Key knew he was not telling the truth. Knew that he was not telling the truth. He had known since July that there'd been a pattern of activity that was illegal. And did he tell the New Zealand public? Not a word for 9 months. 9 months he kept that from the public. John Key has a parliamentary committee, the Security and Intelligence Committee, that should have the right to know that sort of information. During that 9 months, did he call it together to give the parliamentary oversight that that committee was set up to provide and tell them the truth? No, he didn't. So John Key needs to come into this House and say why he wouldn't front up to the New Zealand public, why he wouldn't front up to the Parliamentary Security and Intelligence Committee and tell them the truth about what the agency that he is responsible for as a minister was actually doing. But there's more to it than this, Mr. Speaker. Can we really believe that the biggest operation that New Zealand has mounted in association with the United States on New Zealand soil, involving justice, involving Crown law, involving the police, involving foreign affairs and involving the GCSB, that John Key didn't know anything about what was happening? Can we really believe that as being credible? Can we then believe that the GCSB for months and months and months never told him the truth about the illegality of the actions? Well, you know, there's a couple of explanations. One is dishonesty and incompetence and disregard and arrogant disregard for the rights of New Zealanders to know. Sir Bruce Ferguson came up with another explanation, and he said it publicly, very unusual for a top civil servant, served the country loyally for 4 decades. He said, when I dealt with John Key, he wasn't interested in what we were doing. He wasn't interested in what we were doing. But then that doesn't explain why he was never told by Ian Fletcher. Because Ian Fletcher was the man that he had personally handpicked in breach of the normal procedures of the State Services Commission to put in, it is true, and Ian Rennie made it clear that it was highly unusual for him to do that. That's yes minister talk for I was astonished and I was shocked that he did it. He went in and he handpicked his own person to head the GCSB. And he didn't just handpick the person. There was only one interview, Mr. Speaker. One interview. And they chose the person who interviewed best. One interview. That really smells. The PM is meant to be the minister in charge of that agency. He's meant to know what's going on, and he's meant to hold it accountable. And the Prime Minister failed on every front. But can we believe this too, Mr. Speaker? Bill English signed a ministerial warrant covering up the role of the GCSB in this affair. That's never been done in New Zealand's history before, Chris Finlayson. Never been done. Can you really believe that Bill English took an unprecedented step acting as Prime Minister and never told John Key when he came back to New Zealand that he had signed this warrant covering the matter up? Never been done in history, and he didn't bother to tell John Key, hey, pull the other arm. Nobody believes that. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, this affair smells. It smells in every aspect. There have been too many brain fades. There have been too many lies by omission. There have been too many times when the government hasn't been prepared to be open and transparent. And as Chris Finlayson quoted before, Oliver Wendell Holmes said that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And what we need is, Mr. Speaker, a full and independent inquiry to allow the sun to shine in on this murky affair.
Order, order. I call the Honourable Minister Jerry Brown.